Welcome to the Maximize Business Value Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their business on their terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Now here's your host, CEO of Mastery Partners, Tom Bronson.
Hi, this is Tom Bronson, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business leaders who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. In this episode, we're going to wrap up a two-part series on StoryBrand. If you picked up last week's podcast or blog post, then you are no doubt aware by now that I am absolutely in love with Donald Miller's best-selling book, Building a Story Brand, Clarify Your Message So Your Customers Will Listen. Last week, we talked about the simple-to-follow StoryBrand 7-part framework. It reads like a sentence. A character has a problem and meets a guide who gives them a plan and calls them to action that helps them avoid failure and ends in success. Now, if you took my advice last week, then you took the time to build your own brand script based on this easy-to-follow framework. Now, if you didn't do that, I suggest that you go back and either listen to last week's podcast or read last week's blog post so that you can start building your own brand script. I have a degree in marketing. Now, my degree is almost as old as I am, and that means that the things I learned back in the 80s applied to the marketing techniques that we used back then. For those of you who weren't around in the 80s, there was no such thing as a website because Al Gore had not yet invented the internet. Back then, we focused on televisions and newspapers and magazines and sometimes even direct mail. Today, the mediums are quite different. My degree in marketing has been rendered nearly useless based on today's mediums. For all the years I've been in business, I really wish that I had a process to follow that was as simple as the StoryBrand framework. StoryBrand genuinely takes the mystery out of writing a message so that your customers will understand quickly and want to pay attention. So last week, we walked through the 7-step process to build your brand script. This week, I'd like to focus on taking that StoryBrand brand script and putting it to practical use in your marketing efforts. Now, if you haven't already done so, I strongly suggest that you pick up StoryBrand because because all I can do here is give you an overview, but Miller gives great and detailed descriptions of how to implement your brand script into your everyday marketing material. As Miller says in the opening paragraph of chapter 12, and here I quote, "We will only see an increased engagement from our customers if we implement our StoryBrand brand script in our marketing and messaging material. The brand script you've put together has to show on websites, in email campaigns, elevator pitches, and sales scripts. The more you execute, the more clearly you will communicate, and the more your brand will stand out." End quote. The more I learn about StoryBrand and the more we have woven it into our own marketing material, the more I realize that any business can use this simple concept to really stand out from their competition and achieve great results in driving customers into their business. I spend a good portion of my days talking with business owners about how we can help them prepare their business for a future transition. When I get those calls, one of the first things I do is go straight to their website because I want to see how their business is using their website to drive customers to them. Frankly, you may not be surprised to hear this, but I'm astounded at the number of websites that are 20 years old, using old technology, and really amount to not much more than a brochure on the internet. Now, don't get me wrong. There are many great websites out there today, but there are still too many websites that just miss the mark. There are so many inexpensive tools to let your website languish. It's very affordable today to build a great website. And that's why here, when we're talking about implementing your brand script, one of the first places that I believe any business should start to implement their brand script is on their website. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Miller suggests that every website should have at least these 5 things: an offer above the fold, obvious calls to action, images of success, a bite-sized breakdown of your revenue streams, and very few words. Let's take a moment and explore each one of these important website attributes, starting with an offer above the fold. So an offer above the fold harkens back to the heyday of print media. In newspapers, you always wanted your offer to be on the top side of the fold of the newspaper. If your advertisement or offer is below the fold, you risk not being seen by potential customers. We can all learn from the old newspaper days when we are creating a great website. When you go to your website, do you have to scroll down in order to see your brand script or calls to action, or worse yet, are your brand script and calls to action absent from your website? If you do have to scroll down, then you need to redesign your website to ensure that your brand script is very clear without having to scroll down. With all of the information available to us today, there are very few people that are patient enough to dig through your website, trying to mine their way to understand what's in it for them. Make it obvious. Put it front and center, above the fold, so you can grab their attention. Second, you need an obvious call to action. Now, you might recall from last week's podcast that a call to action is the one thing that your customer needs to do in order to engage in business with you. There are 2 types of calls to action. The first is a direct call to action that gives your customers the ability to buy now if they're ready. The second type of call to action is a transitional call to action, also called a lead magnet. So think of this as the "I'm not ready to get married yet, but I'd be happy to go on a date." So, of course, it's preferred to use a direct call to action so your customers can engage immediately. However, if your business is like ours, where every service or offer is customized to your character's needs, then perhaps a transitional call to action would be a great approach for you. If that describes your business, you should also think about creating a direct call to action that maybe just prompts the visitor to call now. It is so important to have an obvious call to action above the fold and to repeat it throughout your website. Next are images of success. What kind of images do you use on your website? Are they beautiful images depicting your product or service? Or do the images on your website show happy customers using your products or services? A happy customer holding your product is far superior to an image of your product sitting on a table in some white room. Of the most common mistakes, or one of the most common mistakes on websites today, is putting a picture of your beautiful building front and center. That just wastes mental calories trying to get to the message. My advice: lose the building. Focus on the happy customers who have achieved success with your product or service. Now, the next one, a bite-sized breakdown of your revenue streams, is a little less obvious. So many businesses today have a very broad product offering. In fact, I was with a client today that has over 400 items in their product offering. Now, if that describes you obviously can't show everything above the fold. A better approach would be to synthesize your product offering into the single or one or two most likely candidates to engage your prospect for the first time. This is way easier to say than it is to do. I totally get that. Another way to think about it would be to analyze your most profitable products. If your most profitable products are the things that drive customers to you, then that would be a great place to start with your images. And finally, you have to use very few words. In this age of high information overload, no one really reads websites anymore. Rather, we just scan them. So the fewer words you can use to drive your message home, the better. Think of the phrase first coined by the French philosopher Blaise Pascal in 1657, and by the way, used over and over throughout the centuries. If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. If your message is complicated, then spend the time to whittle it down to the fewest possible words that communicate exactly the message that will engage your prospect. So as you're redesigning your website with these 5 very important things, the most important thing to make certain is that it stays on script. Make sure that your brand script is front and center. Finally, today, I'd like to mention the 5 almost free things you can do to implement your StoryBrand framework and grow your business according to Miller. Number 1, create a great one-liner. Think of your one-liner as a 1 to 3 sentence elevator pitch that clearly articulates your brand message. Developing a strong one-liner is not easy to do. Take the components of your brand script and find a way to articulate the character, the problem, the plan, and the success in just 2 or 3 sentences. Now, this will take some work. I suggest that you make a draft, share it with your team, and wordsmith it until you have something that will keep your customers' attention. Number 2, create a lead generator. You definitely need a lead generator. You can collect email addresses by offering free transitional calls to action like white papers or ebooks or an e-course or a webinar or just about anything that will entice a visitor to give you their email address. Number 3, once you've collected those email addresses, you need to create an automated email drip campaign. That is a way to stay in front of those prospects that have engaged by giving you their email. Now, there are dozens of free and paid tools that you can use to create automated campaigns, just like we have, so that once it starts, you don't have to think about what the next step is. It automatically communicates with your prospects so you can stay top of mind with them. Number 4, collect and tell stories of transformation. When you created your brand script, you articulated a character transformation of the hero of the story. Be sure to collect stories of customers who have been transformed by your products or services and tell those stories so that others can see themselves in the story. Number 5, create a system that generates referrals. Now, if you're like me, you hate to be asked could you identify 1 or 2 friends that you can refer? That's the old school way of collecting referrals. Today, there are much more sophisticated and nuanced ways to ask your customers to give you a referral. Now, if you have customers that are genuinely delighted by your products or services, it's okay to ask them for a referral. But it's even better if you make them an offer and give them an incentive to give you that referral. Simply asking a customer for a referral is not enough. Tell them specifically what you would like to have and give them a format to provide that referral. There are so many more things to implement your brand script into your marketing material. And if you want to learn them, I suggest that you go buy Building a StoryBrand by Donald Miller. Of course, if you'd like to implement on your own, we're here to help. Just like you, we've spent time analyzing our own marketing so that we could implement our brand script into our marketing messages. If you take the time to do that, you can transform your marketing into a lead generating machine that can't help but make your business grow. And of course, as you already know, a growing business makes you more valuable. And that's what this podcast is all about, maximizing your business value. This is the Maximize Business Value podcast, where we give practical advice to business owners on how to build long-term sustainable value in their business. Be sure to tune in each week and follow us wherever you found this podcast. And be sure to comment. We love comments, and follow us everywhere. So until next time, I'm Tom Bronson, reminding you that it is not enough to create your brand script. You also need to implement it in all of your marketing messaging while you maximize business value.
Thank you for tuning in to the Maximize Business Value podcast with Tom Bronson. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their own terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Learn more on how to build long-term, sustainable business value and get free value-building tools by visiting our website, www.masterypartners.com. That's Mastery with a Y, masterypartners.com. Check it out.
That was perfect. I wouldn't make any changes on that.